Hello, welcome to my FLDS Plural Marriage presentation. We're going to go over a little bit of what we're going to go through in these slides, beginning with understanding the history of plural marriage within the FLDS community. Who does plural marriage affect? Plural marriage and religion. Plural marriage within a social aspect. Plural marriage and the legal system. And then why is plural marriage still practiced today? So how did this all start? While most people have probably heard of the Mormon religion, fewer know very much about the FLDS, or the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The FLDS are a separate sect from the mainstream Mormon religion that practices plural marriage. Mormonism as a whole, and the practice of plural marriage, was born in 1834 out of a divine experience religious leader Joseph Smith reportedly had of an angel coming to him and telling him that it was God's will that he bring the principles from the Old Testament back into practice because he was experiencing the quote-unquote latter days. Those were the days that God intended to bring the Old Testament principles back into the time that Joseph was living. In 1852, polygamy had a mass following and participants decided to go public with their lifestyle. That wouldn't last very long. The presidential election happened just a few years later, and the Republican Party used their ticket to condemn polygamy along with slavery. When President Grover Cleveland was elected, he made an impassioned speech to Congress about the importance of leaving Mormons out of any talk about the American family ideal. In 1862, laws began to pass resisting the practice of plural marriage, and by 1880, heightened action was being taken when federal officers were deployed to identify and prosecute those found to still be living a polygamous lifestyle. Almost 2 decades later, in 1896, Utah actually made a bargain with the American government that if they officially denounced polygamy, they would be granted statehood by the U.S. In 1904, Joseph F. Smith, who was the 6th president of the Mormon Church at that time, issued a manifesto that officially banned plural marriages as a church practice and made the act of polygamy punishable by excommunication from the church, which is the highest punishment a member of the Mormon community can receive. By 1920, underground members of the church still practicing plural marriage started to surface and almost worked as rebels to bring the practice back into mainstream America again. This really was the birth of fundamentalism as we know it today. Warren Jeffs, son of Rulon Jeffs, inherited the position as head of the FLDS when his father died in September of 2002. Unfortunately, this began a long period of sexual abuse, psychological torture, pedophilia, and entrapment. By 2011, Jeffs had been arrested, tried, and convicted for child rape. In present-day plural marriage, often used interchangeably with bigamy, is illegal in all 50 states and the U.S. territories of Puerto Rico and Guam. So who does polygamy affect? Above all, women and female children are impacted the most heavily. According to a report by Dr. Lindsay Shepard, studies report a much higher occurrence of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, low cognitive function, and other psychiatric disorders in polygamous women in comparison to monogamous women. Female children are at a constant risk of being married off to older men at very young ages. Child brides are a normal part of the FLDS function, and girls as young as 10 are being wed to men in polygamous communities. The psychological well-being of male children is also an issue. Muhammad Razak, writing for the International Journal of Psychosocial Rehabilitation, stated that children from polygamous families report more mental health problems, social difficulties, and poorer school achievements. They also suffer from much higher rates of low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and paranoid ideation. In general, these children, while undoubtedly loved, are often subject to neglect, malnutrition, child labor, and decreased education. If you've ever heard about or seen the raids on TV, There are numerous isolated, cult-like settlements that house many women and children who become separated from family members and are sometimes never reunited. Aunts and uncles, mothers and children, cousins and grandparents are torn apart. In most instances, the raids discover horrific crimes being committed under secrecy, but the devastation of familial separation wreaks havoc on those involved as well. Polygamous men are also more prone to psychotic disorder, anxiety, and paranoid ideation, but they generally reap the most benefits from anyone else in the situation. They are granted social and religious superiority. Their wives must patently submit themselves to him at all times, and often it's he who chooses who becomes his wife. Lastly, society sometimes bears the brunt of polygamous families. According to the Clinical Child and Family Psychology Review, women, in a bid for superiority and vying for inheritance, have as many children as they possibly can, which often leads to poor care or abuse for the children. Eventually, the lack of education and poor childhood treatment releases adults into society that are statistically more likely to commit crimes or fall into substance abuse. So what do the FLDS believe? Members of the FLDS foster a strong belief system that stems from following principles of the Old Testament. They believe that whomever you marry in this life, you are sealed to, and you will continue your marriage in heaven. There are also temple ceremonies that can be performed to ensure that your entire family stays together in heaven as well. Heaven has 3 levels: celestial, terrestrial, and telestial. But only those who live a highly righteous life will make it to the celestial level of heaven and live eternity in God's presence. Additionally, it's believed that whomever is the current leader of the church is a prophet of God. Many believe him to be immortal, and he is seen as the direct line or the mouth of God. Because the Book of Mormon teaches that plural marriage is necessary to drive higher reproduction, adultery is considered one of the top sins. The sin is not an act of betrayal, but it is an act of wasting sperm on someone who is not your wife, if you are not making a clear effort to produce a baby from the union. So looking at the social aspect of plural marriage, unfortunately, the reality and what people see on TV or in social media from pop culture are not very directly related. The joyful scenes that splash across TLC shows and fictional shows featuring plural marriages are not the truth of the majority of FLDS societies. An unnamed woman who grew up in a polygamous sect spoke out against Bill SB 102 in Utah, informing the public and the government that they were focusing on the wrong thing. She described regular occurrences of incest when an uncle married his young niece, or cousins were forced to marry, resulting in children with serious disabilities or health problems. She also highlighted child brides, missing children, and rampant sexual abuse. Polygamy has been described as America's newly adopted pet project for cultural acceptance after the generalized acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community. Popular shows like Sister Wives has helped to thrust polygamy into the spotlight in a fun and entertaining way without addressing the dark underbelly only occasionally shown on the nightly news. So underneath all this, what does the law say about polygamy? In 1862, when polygamy was first outlawed by the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act, the law criminalized polygamy but was barely enforced due to the Civil War and President Lincoln really not putting much energy into enforcing it. He had bigger problems at the time, and it kind of just fell by the wayside. Next, in 1882, a new act was passed that hit much harder than its predecessor. The Edmunds-Tucker Act made it illegal for polygamists to hold public office, vote, or even serve on juries. And this actually wasn't repealed until 1978. Lastly, and most recently, in 2020, Bill SB 102 was passed unanimously to change the law in Utah from polygamy being a felony charge to a mere infraction. While many view it as an imperfect law until polygamy is entirely decriminalized, it has been praised for its live and let live philosophy and provided relief to plural marriage families across Utah. So after such a long history of trouble, why do polygamists still practice today? There are several answers to this. According to Dr. Paige Henry, this could be due to commitment to religion. They feel that the more righteous lives they live and the more children that they have, that they will get into heaven and into a higher level of heaven. Most people who are in the FLDS community were born into the community and have a fear of leaving a familiar environment. Most of them would have no place to go and no money if they did leave, so economic stability holds them there as well. They stay for safety, companionship, and of course for love. The practice of polygamy is an imperfect and complex system with both a bright, shiny surface of love and family and a dark underbelly of abuse and crimes committed. Hopefully, the future holds a solution that allows live and let live to prosper without concern for the safety of those involved. Thank you.